Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Mystery Science Theater 3000, episode 1101, Reptilicus. This is the first episode of the brand new season, kick-started into existence, now being released on Netflix, being put out today. I did get to see it early because I donated to the Kickstarter, but they asked for fans not to release any reviews until the day it went up on Netflix, so that's what I'm doing. If you are wondering, it's actually labeled on Netflix, Mystery Science Theater 3000 The Return. Not exactly sure why. That's kind of a separate thing than the classic Mystery Science Theater 3000 episodes, which I think is a little weird, but this fits in quite nicely with the other episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000, so I kind of don't understand why they would in a pure viewing sense, because I think they did a pretty good job of bringing back Mystery Science Theater. Now, the one thing to think about is that this is more of a Joel Mystery Science Theater than a Mike Mystery Science Theater. You're going to hear a lot of people talking about how the show hasn't been around in 19 years, and it's been gone for 19 years, and now it's back. But really a more accurate description would be, because the only people who are involved from the original show creatively, other than doing cameos and such, is Joel, who's very involved, and in this episode Paul Chaplin, who is a longtime writer of the show, who actually was writing up until the end, I believe, but everyone else is not as creatively involved. When thinking of this show, you should really think of it's been the first time this kind of Mystery Science Theater 3000 has been around since about Mitchell, which I believe is 1993, so that's 24 years since we've had this kind of a Mystery Science Theater episode. It has invention exchanges. It has more of the kind of family-friendly kind of atmosphere that Joel had. Not extremely, when I say that, don't be off-put by Mystery Science Theater. It just has kind of humor that's more broad and sillier, and it can be mean in some senses. The one thing about Mystery Science Theater 3000 is you're throwing out so many jokes because you have a long movie to fill up with them. So it kind of uses a lot of different sorts of humor in it. Although I will say, I think Jonah and the bots do a very good job of doing their own thing. It is their own show. As much as it feels very influenced by Joel, I really got the sense of Jonah Ray, who's now Jonah Heston, which is a nice callback also to Joel Robinson, because jokes are actually more rapid fire than before. In fact, there's sometimes it felt like he just kept coming and coming and coming. The movie riffing part of it and what they've changed about that, I think, is probably going to be the thing that is most off-putting for most people. Now, the humor in it, I never minded because I've always looked at it as, from a pure production standpoint, it's very hard to just come up with riffs for an entire movie and also make it funny and enjoyable. Those different kinds of jokes never really mattered to me. They were always good at sometimes having a sort of a lewd joke or more pointing out how dumb this movie is or things like that, and they could kind of get a nice balance to it. You do have to have a mixture of the kind of humor you're doing, so that doesn't bother me. The rapid fireness of it was a little crazy. I got used to it. They talked about in interviews, they didn't, even in the quote-unquote best episodes of Mystery Science Theater, the lulls in the, even in things like Manos, they said there's times where you're just watching the movie with the bots, and I was like, I never really minded that. And for me, frankly, it was kind of an introduction to cult movies and B movies. It got me into art house stuff and other kinds of film unknowingly, and then later I was like, oh, I know this kind of thing. I've watched similar crappier versions on Mystery Science Theater. This show seems to be more about the riffs and getting people into that. I don't think the show was ever really trying to get people to eventually see John Waters and Russ Meyer and things. I think it was really trying to do this funny show, and I think that's primarily their concern, and that in fact works. I think if the riffing didn't work, Mystery Science Theater wouldn't work, and the riffing does work with the silhouettes in the theater. However, they do these things, and people were afraid of this in the trailer when it came out, of Tom Servo floating up from his seat and doing things, and Jonah standing up, and Crow standing up, and them actually doing movements in the theater with the silhouettes, which they rarely did in the original series. And it was never, to be honest, the funniest thing. And as much as I heard from people on Twitter and so forth, when I posted the trailer, people were worried about that. I thought, I doubt they'll do that often, which I was wrong. They even have Gypsy come in from the top, come down, and make a joke and drop something there. It's very weird. Comes back, picks it up later on in the episode. I didn't love that stuff because I think that was maybe going a bit too far. I think I'll have to get used to it, as I haven't seen the rest of season 11. Apparently they do use a lot of that, and the puppeteering is different in this because they actually have puppeteer and then the guys who are doing doing the voices of Tom Servo and Crow, control the mouths, but are kind of off screen, is different because automatically the puppeteering isn't like when I talked about in my review of the first episode of season 8 that Bill Corbett was getting used to being a puppeteer. And that was a problem when Kevin Murphy started, when Trace Bilyeu started. Like, they weren't trained puppeteers. Eventually they became a lot better at it. This time they got people from like Jim Henson's workshop to do the bots. So I think that's a little different. And having that in the early episodes was the most jarring for me. It wasn't having the different voice for the bots or having Jonah or anything. It really was them moving in the theater. One of the things with the bots and having actual trained puppeteers with them is kind of part of one of the things that confused me and I wasn't as into. The show certainly, I think, has a lot more money than it ever did when it was on Sci-Fi or Comedy Central. Part of me loves that as a fan because I always felt like it was kind of hindered by the fact that it always kind of had to scrape together and make itself happen. But before it was, certainly production-wise, the show has rapidly changed. If you hear about how they made the show back in the day, which was 7 days, write the show, develop the show, shoot the show, everything, the whole thing was done in 7 days. Just still fairly quick. Now it's like they shot all the riffing in like 2 weeks. They shot all the host segments right after that. It seems a lot more different production process. This isn't done in Minnesota, it's now done in LA, which gives them greater access to talent, certainly. That vibe and having more money from the Kickstarter, I think, helped make the show kind of a lot bigger. The effects are updated, it's done much more of an HD way. Most of it was done in 4:3 before. So they're sort of respecting the aspect ratio to these movies that no one respects. Instead of Deep 13, it's Moon 13, where Felicia Day and Patton Oswalt are, and she is, of course, playing the great-granddaughter of Pearl Forrester. She's Kinga Forrester. You don't get a lot with that, which, much like the beginning of season 8, would kind of try to get you in on what makes Mystery Science Theater special, which is setting it up, giving you as much info as you need, and then getting onto the riffing. And they do a cool thing where you see Jonah actually getting kidnapped and sent up to the thing, which they never showed as well, I guess with Mike and Mitchell a little bit, but this they really showed it to a certain degree of Jonah getting kidnapped and sent to the Satellite of Love. I really do like that they showed that, but some of the times with the sets I was like, whoa, there's like a lot of money in this thing. And then in Moon 13 they have like this skull band, which I wasn't as into that, frankly. I thought like it's like a variety show or something. Although it does seem to have continuity, or it appears like it's going to have continuity. I don't really know at this point. It appears more like like where Joel would talk to the camera. That I found very interesting to change that. And it does go back to the Joel era in that, mainly because Joel is running it, so we should expect that. It was weird, like Will Wheaton at the beginning and Aaron Gray from the original Battlestar Galactica, which I don't know. I didn't actually know who that was. I'm not a big Battlestar Galactica fan. I liked sort of seeing Will Wheaton. I know it's gonna have more guest stars. There weren't a ton of guest stars in the original except for like Leonard Maltin. Those kind of things are gonna take me more time to get used to. I remember this kind of smaller show that's shot in Minnesota that's kind of this weirder thing that you just happen on when you're flipping through channels. And this doesn't feel like that. This feels like almost like the newer Doctor Who, where suddenly this kind of quaint little thing that has this kind of weird atmosphere to it. It's made with a little bit of money, but has a huge cult following, suddenly has a lot more money behind it. It's more like modern and such. And it has a little bit of that just aesthetically. I don't think it's at all like Doctor Who. As far as the new cast, Felicia Day, I'm not as familiar with. I thought she's fine. I think her kind of acting works for playing a Mad. I don't know of her other stuff. I don't really get why she's famous or anything. That's more just because I haven't seen her show. So it's less of a criticism and more of I'm just unaware. Patton Oswalt, I liked as TV's son or TV's Frank, which they just go, you're just Max, but I do like the idea that he's TV's son or TV's Frank is funny. And it's great casting because he looks like Frank Conniff a little bit. I didn't see his name listed in the writers listing, but I hope he helps write the show as well because he's very, very funny. And in terms of the writers' room, I know that they're having various TV writers come on and help a little bit. In this episode, listed were Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland, who wrote and created Rick and Morty. I didn't notice that they had written it until I saw their names in there. So if that's something that gets you to watch the show, sure, I tweeted that just to get people interested in Mystery Science Theater, but I didn't notice it, to be honest, but I think it's cool that they got a chance to do that. No offense to them or anything, I wasn't really looking for it. This is an episode in particular I would like to rewatch because so much of this episode is about what is this going to be like? Will this hold up? Will this be good? And it's different rewatching this episode later and really watching it as a Mystery Science Theater episode, because I find a lot of that almost overwhelming. I like Jonah a lot. I think he's a good host. I think he's almost the perfect host. He's kind of like the protege of Joel in a lot of ways in terms of his kind of way about doing the show and things. I liked Hampton Yount as Crow. I thought did a good job. I like Baron Vaughn a lot as Tom Servo. I like the little skit in there where it appears that Tom Servo already has changed and the original's gone, and now we have a clone, which is very funny. Everyone in this is the third iteration of each of the things. It's the third version of Crow, third voice for Tom Servo, and third host, which is all kind of interesting that happening at once. They have great chemistry together that works so well the way it should. It seems like they worked on their chemistry before, or it feels that way, and it feels like so automatic. It gels very well, and that's how great Mystery Science Theater teams work, is when they just have that natural chemistry. I can't wait to see it kind of evolve as the series goes on. The host segments, I like the kind of cloning one was fun, but the one thing that was weird is the letters part was a host segment, not towards the kind of outro host segment, which it normally used to be. I was a little confused, like that just felt a little off. That was probably the one thing I was like, I mean, I'm glad they still read letters. I didn't know I could still write letters in. They had like the commercial breaks in there and the host segments, and I guess you don't really need them because you're not on a TV channel with commercials. Such a part of what Mystery Science Theater was, and you can get into a larger conversation about how Netflix shows don't really need to be as structured like they're going to air on TV as they do. But I think Mystery Science Theater is a special case in the fact that so much of its format relies on that. I didn't mind as much. It was just, I guess, the ones that were just there to like show Moon 13 and the band playing and things like that. Those I don't know if we needed, but I kind of like them, and I like Patton Oswalt talking, so I'll get used to those. Those I'm kind of like, it was a little weird, but I was like, whatever. The one post segment, which I think is almost an all-timer, is the song he sings about Reptilicus, the rap song they do that belongs on a Clowns in the Sky CD or SoundCloud playlist, whatever they do now. That is like deserves to be in the all-time great Mystery Science Theater 3000 songs. They did an excellent job. That is hilarious. Kind of like a Hamilton-esque kind of rapping within it. I almost have that stuck in my head a little bit, so they did a great job with that. Reptilicus as a movie, it is the first and only monster movie made in Denmark. It is actually the second version of this movie. The original Danish version was directed by Paul Bang, and then American International Pictures bought it and made an English language version, which was directed by Sidney Pink, using almost the same cast. I'm curious what the Danish version is. Not enough to actually watch it. I guess they could make fun of that, but that is in another language. It was pretty much the same movie, just like in English and directed by Sidney Pink. And there's almost a lawsuit over this movie between the original version and this version, but the original director liked it, I guess. It is kind of a strange little movie. It's a perfect choice for Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode. I'm kind of glad they went with a color one, because I think this is a big one to get people into it, and I think black and white, especially in today's day and age, would probably turn some people off, but I hope they at least have a few black and white episodes. And apparently there was a clip of this used in a episode of South Park called Cancelled. I think this was a good start. I think this is a good way to bring back the show. I think also it's a good episode. It was a good return. With that one song, has some great all-time moments, and I think it showcased everything I really love about Mystery Science Theater, and particularly kind of the Joel era, and I'm curious to see where the show goes. Does it make me want to watch more episodes? Absolutely, but I was probably going to do that anyway. I can't say what it's like to watch for a non-fan, because I'm like so in, it's like ridiculous to say, but I think they did a good job in picking like kind of a more accessible kind of a movie, at least one in color, making the show at least more like 2017-y, and making it more like quippy and riffy, which I think will maybe work for more of a modern audience. We'll see. As someone who taped tons of episodes and loved this show, I'm happy where it's going so far, and I'm going to keep watching it. It definitely has my vote. As someone who gave to the Kickstarter, I'm very happy what I pledged to, and I'm very happy that this show is back, and I think you will not be disappointed if you're a fan, or even a casual fan. I think some people might get upset over very little nitpicky things, but for the most part, this is a very above average episode. Every season has a really great episode, and I don't think the first one of any season probably is. I think there might be an exception to that, but I don't think this one was ever going to be. It's an above average episode, and a better than just an okay, let's get them in and get you excited for kind of a Mystery Science Theater. And there are changes to it, which I guess you can overdo addressing in a review like this, but I think generally they did a very good job bringing back the satellite of love and riffing on B-movies all over again, and I am very happy as a fan. And I think if you're too upset with the minor things, you should really, as I've said before, and as the theme song says, you should really just relax, sit back, and just get ready to watch Mystery Science Theater on your couch all over again. So if you have seen Mystery Science Theater 3000, episode 1101, Reptilicus, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.